Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. Yes, my voice is still messed up, and yes, my hearing is still messed up, but I can still talk. And we have some interesting things to talk about. Captain Smalls of the United States Air Force has predicted we'll be at war with China in 2 years. So much so, he's already gotten permission and is conducting forward combat drills with several other nations: Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and perhaps a few others. These are simple insertion tactics like bringing troops forward to a certain point, making sure that they're supplied, but his locations are interesting. They're small uninhabited islands so that way they can set up targets and stuff like that and not worry about disturbing the locals. But they're also roughly simulating the terrain of what China has. Remember, China's a big place. It's one of the top five biggest countries in the world. I think it's three after Russia and Canada, but I could be wrong on that. I know the United States and China are close to each other. So the question is, why is he so hawkish on this example? Now, speaking as an ex military man myself, I can say that the Boy Scout motto is the correct one: be prepared. And right now, I'm going to say no one is prepared for a World War I or World War II style conflict, especially not at the modernized age. There's entirely different tactics, just like as there is in every war. They always say generals plan for the last war, and that's true because no one's done this sort of thing in 80 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, no offense to them, they were not equipped to deal with stealth jets coming in and blowing up their radar installations and then wave after wave of overwhelming superiority. Russia went into Afghanistan in the 80s. They weren't prepared for how tenacious those people were. And again, in Ukraine, Russia's in Ukraine. Sorry, the USSR attacked Afghanistan in the 80s, and Russia's attacking Ukraine right now. There is a difference between the two. So, since we have China rattling sabers with Taiwan, which admittedly is kind of the status quo for those two nations, why did this generally suddenly decide now is the appropriate time to be in preparing? I would argue the opposite, in fact. This would be the time nobody would raise a hand or a finger. Everybody's looking at Russia versus Ukraine and going, we need to figure that out. After all, it's a most unusual situation. If I give you 10 times the forces, 10 times the reserves, and 10 times the equipment, you're going to expect to body slam whoever you come across. Especially because Russia still has that experience of being the USSR in Afghanistan. Some of those generals are still around and can be consulted with to say, hey, how do you deal with these $2 guerrilla combat units who are basically the same as the United States militia forces? I'm not talking the Army Air Reserve or anything. I'm talking about local militias, who is just a bunch of men, women, children, whatever, who've decided they're going to go out on the weekends, shoot at targets, live in tents, and that's how they're going to learn how to defend themselves and their family. That's the real wild card, and everybody has them. They don't advertise because, first rule about survival, you don't advertise what you can do. If you have a basement filled up in such a way that Charles Bronson would be envious of you, you don't advertise it. If you have food, shelter, when people get desperate, they're going to come after you. So that's one of the biggest things, is you can't expect your intelligence and not police officers, but your investigative units to go in and identify who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. You still got to deal with them. Again, the USSR and Russia had this experience. I'm sure Putin knew a few of them personally, but they still were not prepared for the amount of defense that Ukraine has pulled off. Regrettably, at the cost of a lot of lives and a lot of injuries. But this is why I don't think China would be willing to start a war in the next 2 years. Doesn't make sense. China, not insulting their military capabilities in the least. Quite the opposite, I'm complimenting them. If Ukraine had not happened, I think Captain Biggs might be right. The next 2 years, they might have tried to go in to Taiwan, raise a little hell. But China is good at strategic planning. They're aware that the United States is going to jump to the defense of Taiwan, as well as a couple other nations. Your usual suspects, United Kingdom, Australia, since it's in their part of the hemisphere. Places like that. They're not going to hesitate to send everything they have. That makes China's math more complicated. They've also seen in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Ukraine that local resistance doesn't go away. China will doubtlessly be more ruthless in persecuting it and making sure that it doesn't spread and making sure that it doesn't blossom into a widespread movement. But again, don't insult the Chinese generals. They're not dummies. They got there for a reason. It is within living memory that China invaded Vietnam and left for much the same reason the United States did, because they simply couldn't deal with every single household having a gun inside of it and people being willing to organize. China also tends to take a long-term view. They have plans to invade Taiwan. Oh, yes. But much in the same way the United States has plans to invade Canada. They're sitting in a drawer somewhere. They update them every couple of weeks, months, whenever they get new information. And that's where they would be going for this. 2 years. Now, Captain Smalls, his nickname's Biggie, Captain B. Smalls. Anyway, he's doing much the same thing, except he's doing it in the open to show China, hey, we're ready for you, and we will be ready in 2 years. It's a smart bluff. Of course, you can always list your reasons, because China is building those islands in the South China Sea and trying to claim them as official territory. You can see that as a predatory expansion into supposedly neutral waters. You can also see China's actions in the world as a bit belligerent. The conflict between India and China always remains below the radar, and I do not understand this. Yes, Ukraine is more media friendly because you got a bunch of plucky, upset rebels holding off an evil empire. It's a frickin' Star Wars plot, except it's happening in real time. The brave rebel alliance of Ukraine versus the evil empire of the Russians. Remember, I have no problem with Russians. I know Russians. I hang out with Russians. Wonderful people. I'm talking about leaderships. So when I use a generic term, please don't take it as offensive to any given group. But China does not want that in Taiwan. They want to go in, have it done and over with, because they're not really equipped to fight that combat either. The distance between China and Taiwan is much further than the distance between the United Kingdom and France. And D-Day, the invasion of France, was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, amphibious assaults of all time. Now, the English Channel gets a little bit stormy, but compared to the Pacific Ocean, where you have random tsunamis, Japan in the 1400s was being invaded by the Mongols. Twice the Mongols invaded, and twice hurricanes wound up driving them off the island and basically into the sea. Luck of the draw on that one, but China can't predict that with certainty. You never know when typhoon season's coming up. China knows its weapons are probably higher quality than anything Taiwan has. Again, the problem is none of them has been tested in combat. But the other problem is they don't know how many U.S. carriers will be in the region, how much Australia is willing to commit to the region, and if the United Kingdom is going to commit to the region. This could very well be like in World War II when Germany invaded Poland. And I'm sure that's going to be the thing that comes up if China decides to invade Taiwan right now. They're going to be packaged together with Russia and saying, oh, these two are allied, they're invading much smaller nations for their gain. We've seen this before, it's World War II. That brings up all the, we're going to drive these totalitarian regimes into the ground. They'll be called communists, they'll be called Nazi, they'll be called whatever it is. They're totalitarian. Let's not mistake that one bit. China knows this as well, and they don't want to have that label stamped on top of them. Germany invading Poland was the final spark that started World War II. But it already invaded Czech, it had taken over Austria. There were a lot of things leading up to it. Interestingly, again, India is taking a lot of jobs from China. They're not thrilled about that. And it wouldn't surprise me if India decided to test their might against their next door neighbor, because they've been waiting for an excuse to do it for a long time. And that's something I don't believe China has the troops available to do, to fight both in Taiwan and in India, which would then activate Pakistan. Pakistan and China are very close allies. Now, anybody paying attention, you have a very interesting powder keg. India and Pakistan don't like each other. Pakistan is primarily Muslim, and India, let's just call them a polyglot. Lots of Hindus, lots of Sikhs, lots of everything. But what Pakistan and India do have in common are nuclear weapons. And unlike over here with Russia and China, where we get about a half hour to decide how we're going to die, they get seconds. The missile, the cruise missile, whatever it is, the rocket goes up, and you got maybe 5 minutes before the thing is landing on whatever target that you have. There's no time for Patriot interceptors, for theater high altitude air defense missiles. You're making that call now. No time to call the president, the prime minister, the mogul, whatever it is that you might happen to believe in. You have to decide now. And these are the risks of a war in Taiwan for both sides. Again, it's not really in China's interest because they know they can attract a lot of attention quickly. They're smartest by staying neutral and threatening. It's kind of the North Korean strategy. And remember, North Korea is mostly controlled by China. Oh, there's the other satellite theater. North Korea might decide this is a time to let loose our string of artillery designed to wipe out Seoul, the capital of South Korea. And make no mistake, this artillery exists. It's not modern, but artillery you don't really need to be modern. You've had, 70, 80 years to sight it in on whatever you're doing? So, first day, Seoul will be wiped out and the troops will come pouring south of the border. The second day, South Korea is ready to fight back. Now, North Korea does not have the most modern forces in the world, whereas South Korea does, so China would have yet another front to contend with. They have to deal with this every single time they plan a war. Would you be willing to risk that? To put the biggest and most dangerous amphibious assault in history on the table in a strait filled with the best submarines in the world, the best aircraft in the world. You're hoping you can get past all that. And then you have to deal in the north with North Korea going off, and the south with India possibly sending some people across your border. Plus, who knows where anybody's going to strike. Realistically, this will never turn into a World War II scenario, because that's not the way we fight wars anymore. The United States has the pure technical ability to invade China. It doesn't have the troops, it doesn't have the forces, it doesn't have the logistics. China in no way has the capacity to invade the United States. It has the troops, it does not have the logistics. And even so, if you invade the United States, you have all these militias and yahoos who all want to pretend that they're Rambo. Nobody can invade anybody at this point, which only leaves one way of retaliating at each other. That's the nuclear option. Because hopefully nobody's entertaining a biological option, because that would be bad. Let's just say it would be bad. But anyways, this is the tangled web that we're doing here. While I respect that was my rank. While I respect Captain Smalls, I think he's pushing on purpose to get people paranoid. Again, it's his job to do this, to see possibilities. And in a slightly different world, I can see him being right. It's just the Ukraine thing has blown his calculation up. Not that he's not intelligent, but just when you have all these variables to consider, it's really tough to make all of them make sense. Hopefully, the saner generals will look at the fact that there's so much that's variable, they can't control it, and decide not worth their time. Because part of your duty as a general is not only to be prepared, but also to be able to control variables as much as possible, because when your troops lose, you lose too, and it looks bad on you. The Chinese and the Russian generals are held to no less of a standard. That being said, there's always that one psycho in the group, which I don't think Captain Smalls is. I think he's the one that's saying, hey, he's the canary in the coal mine saying this could be a problem. With that, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please hit like, subscribe. Don't forget to click the bell down in the comments, so that way you can be advised every time we upload new content. And we hope you have a fantastic day.